Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started so we can stay a little bit on time. I apologize to folks who just heard me say this. I want to, on marks, but I'll do it. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming this evening to our annual community lecture on regenerative medicine. I appreciate having you turn out and hear what we have to say about our achievement. We're here to celebrate really not just the work that's going on at UCI, but the investment that we made as Californians in cell and gene therapy work, and that comes largely through the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine. This is an absolutely unique initiative across the country that we are grateful to have been a part of. As the director of the center, I'm really proud of the momentum that we have built here over the years, building up not only a cell manufacturing facility, but also a clinical trials unit, our alpha stem cell clinic, and really trying to bring to fruition everything from the bench to the bedside vision of what regenerative medicine can do. So discovery research through translational research and on into those critical phases of cell and gene manufacturing and production, and also clinical trial, and really strive to support that full dimension of work here. I'm especially excited about our training programs as well. UCI, the Stem Cell Research Center, now hosts 4 training programs that span everything from graduate students, doctoral students, clinical fellows, and also undergraduates who are just trying to decide how they're going to move forward in terms of their next steps of their careers, and really trying to give them the tools to discover new careers, whether that's in cell manufacturing, whether it's in medicine, or whether it's moving on to get a Ph.D. in discovery science and work of their own. I'd like to introduce Dean Stamos this evening, who's been such a critical part of this for us. It is my absolute pleasure to have worked with him as Dean of Medicine here at UCI. He's been such an incredible driving and stabilizing force for us. Under his leadership since 2016, the school has risen tremendously in terms of our national research rankings, achieved the highest accreditation. In fact, I'm not supposed to say that out loud. I was just going to say we had our LCME site visit for reaccreditation last week, which I heard went incredibly well. So kudos to him and the entire team. And we've really seen just remarkable growth, both in terms of our research funding and in philanthropic funding here. Dr. Stamos has played also a key role in developing the UCI Medical Center at Irvine and advancing diversity initiatives in medical education. He's a distinguished surgeon and academic leader, and we are incredibly fortunate to have him here. Thank you.
Thank you all. Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be here this evening, and I just am so pleased with the great turnout and love the venue for this fantastic event. I want to thank Dr. Eileen Anderson for the invitation to join you tonight and to say a few words. I feel honored to have that opportunity. I look forward to hearing from JT, Dr. Jonathan Thomas, and our expert panel discussion as well. 2024 has certainly been a very busy, and I heard earlier, tumultuous year. 2025 looks to be even more tumultuous and maybe even busier as well. We will see, right? But it's really one of the most exciting times in recent memory, with the addition over the past 12 months of 98 new faculty members at UCI, 14 new Senate faculty members, as well as the opening of several new buildings, including the Falling Leaves Medical Foundation Research Building, Innovation Research Building, that will open up in just a few months. We also, of course, have opened a new health campus on Jamboree. I'm sure many of you have seen it, if not all of you. And I will say that was the dream of Stanley Vandernoort, our first dean, in 1965. He dreamt of having a medical center on our Irvine campus. When I joined UCI 22 years ago, I have to admit to being a little puzzled why they called it UCI Medical Center when it was located in Orange. I quickly figured out why, but nevertheless, we no longer have to answer that question because we now have UCI Medical Center Irvine, in Irvine on Jamboree. So it's really an incredible accomplishment. I'm so honored and proud to be at the lead of the medical school during the opening of these new facilities. Last summer, we launched, sorry, I'm going to go ahead. Yeah. Thank you. Last summer, we launched our state-of-the-art good manufacturing practice facility. That was helped by a $2 million grant. It was really established to produce FDA-compliant cell and gene therapies in humans. This 7,700 square foot facility contains a manufacturing space, storage warehouse for raw and finished products, and support laboratory areas, including space for quality control testing. 7 separate manufacturing rooms are all designed to operate at BSL2, Biosafety Level 2, and serve internal and external clients. So we're happy to be a resource for the community as well as for our own great scientists here on campus. It's also uniquely poised to specialize in the production of cell gene therapies for clinical trials in not just neurologic diseases and cancer, but many other diseases and ailments as well. Since its opening last year, we've successfully completed our first manufacturing projects. We brought on board Dr. Alex Manella. I don't think oh, there he is, right in front of me. Alex, how are you? Associate Professor of Clinical Medicine, the Division of Hematology Oncology. Dr. Manella is a physician scientist with over 20 years of professional experience, and he joined us from the biopharmaceutical industry as our new medical director of that GMP facility. Pretty fantastic, isn't it, Alex? Finally, we're now in the process of planning the facility's development goals. We were awarded, as I said already, initial 2-year, $2 million grant to help launch the project, along with membership in the very prestigious CIRM, California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, Cell and Gene Therapy Manufacturing Network, a network that crosses the entire state of California. This facility is not just a building, it's, in our opinion, a powerhouse of innovation and hope. Meticulously designed and equipped to produce FDA-compliant cell and gene therapies, which will continue putting UCI at the forefront of medical science. The facility is also now home to our UCI Alpha Clinic, where we conduct clinical trials of cell and gene therapy for patients. We already have 2 UCI investigator-initiated CIRM Clin2 grants under revision, which will help fund these clinical trials. In the last fiscal year, we had $10 million in clinical trial contracts executed through the Alpha Clinic. We currently have, as we heard earlier, 38 active clinical trials and 26 in the pipeline through the Alpha Clinic. We're proud to report that the Alpha Clinic at UCI, under the leadership of Dr. Daniela Boda as director, is now one of 9 Alpha Clinics throughout California, thanks again to CIRM funding that came from that. At the Alpha Clinic, we aim to provide help for clinical trial startups. We aim to deliver a well-organized approach to starting clinical trials. We also provide CTA, or clinical trial agreement, budget support, allowing us to negotiate budgets quickly and accurately and efficiently. We help our researchers find funding opportunities for their projects. We submit and review Medicare cost coverage analysis. We find the most competent subject matter experts to help with grant proposals, particularly when they come from outside. And we're proud to be a resource for institutional knowledge and information. Both the GMP facility and the Alpha Clinic are funded, again, from CIRM with grant awards that will help us to facilitate all the translational research we are doing. At the Alpha Clinic, we help the UCI community by overseeing all stem cell research studies and managing clinical trials from start to finish. We actually have 3 clinical trial units within UCI. We have the Alpha Clinic, we have the Stern Center for Clinical Trials in the Cancer Center, and we have the Center for Clinical Research, also under the leadership of Dr. All of these efforts in translational research and clinical trials are performed under the regulatory approval of the FDA, and we also act as a liaison between UCI and stakeholders on campus, including our IRB, providing forms and paperwork for our clinical trial submissions. We also have a CRO-type function providing database development, project management, research nursing support, as well as training and outreach activities. So really intentionally a full-stop shop for everything going on within clinical trials and clinical research. The Alpha Clinic team helps our investigators through protocol applications, obviously ensures good education, ensures compliance with all of the FDA, ICH, ECP, and university standards. It also navigates the complexities of new IND applications. We're proud of the work we're already doing in the areas of diabetes, eye disease, and neurologic disease, just to name a few. We currently have 2 investigator-initiated trials for glioblastoma, led by Dr. Daniela Boda, and another focusing on Huntington's disease, led by Dr. Leslie Thompson. In the future, we're working to bring together stem cell trials on spinal cord injuries, cardiac disease, kidney disease, as well as blood disorders and HIV and AIDS. At UCI, we know that our future is bright and are excited about the days ahead. Again, thank you very much for being here tonight, and we hope you greatly enjoyed the program.
Okay, with that, we're going to transition to our feature. I am incredibly pleased to be able to introduce Dr. Jonathan Thomas, who has graciously come all the way here to talk to us about where we are in incredible investment, again, that we as taxpayers in the state of California towards funding for cell and gene medicine. It's really an honor to have him here. He is the president and CEO of the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, where he leads efforts to accelerate the development of cell and gene therapies, all kinds for unmet medical needs. Under his leadership, CIRM supports groundbreaking research and fosters innovation in the regenerative medicine field. He's kind of a unicorn. He has an interesting background in both law and science, which makes him incredibly qualified to really been a key driver for the California Regenerative Medicine since its inception. Beyond his role at CIRM, Dr. Thomas is the co-founding partner of Sabre Capital and has clerked for White House counsel Lloyd Cutler and the U.S. Court of Appeals, which I did not know until I saw this earlier today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. John Thomas this evening.
Thank you, Eileen, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening. As you may have heard, we're hoping that you're going to be joined tonight by Dr. Peter Marks from CIRM at the FDA, who's sort of the single most important person from the regulatory standpoint for the cell and gene therapy space at the FDA, and as part of that, pretty much in the country, I think we can say. He was unable to make it tonight. As you all have been following, there's a bit of turmoil going on back east that has led to a number of unintended or perhaps intended consequences that made it so that he couldn't join us. However, Eileen asked if I would speak to you about CIRM, which you are hearing all about. Many of you may not know what that is, and so I will be delighted to speak to you and give you chapter and verse on what CIRM does and where we sort of view California and Irvine in particular in the grand scheme of things in the regenerative medicine space. Hello, Adrian. Adrian's everywhere, always comes. Very nice to see you. Okay, so let's see. So we always begin every presentation with our mission, which is to accelerate world-class science to deliver transformative regenerative medicine treatments in an equitable manner to a diverse California and world. So CIRM, for those of you who don't recall, there's this really weird process only in California where if you get enough signatures, you can create something to put on the statewide ballot, and if it passes, it becomes law, and it gets imposed on the entire governmental structure of the state. And in 2004, which was at a time when stem cells were a fledgling field, President Bush put a funding ban, may ring a bell, beating the past here, put a funding ban on NIH using federal dollars to create new embryonic stem cell lines, which brought the field of regenerative medicine to a crashing halt about 6 years into its discovery. Should note, by the way, for historians out there, that the first human embryonic stem cell was isolated by Dr. Jamie Thompson at the University of Wisconsin in 1998. The whole field has come since 1998, means it's a new field in terms of new drug and therapy development, very new field compared to normal pills you guys might take, or for those of you who've gotten monoclonal antibodies to treat you for one thing or another, all of that stuff was in the past. And the cell and gene therapy space is all developed much more recently. And we're really sort of in, what would you say, Eileen, early midlife at this point as a field? Long way to go. Anyway, so the CIRM was created because of that funding ban by President Bush. And the fellow named Bob Klein, who was a real estate financier with a child with type 1 diabetes, lives up in Palo Alto, who understood bond financing, came up with this brilliant idea to create an agency that funded stem cell research using state bond money as the source of grants and loans to academic institutions, research institutions, and biotech companies throughout the state of California. And he wrote up this very long proposition called Proposition 71. He needed to get over 1 million signatures, which sounds really intimidating until you hear that there's actually a cottage industry of signature gatherers. There's an industry for everything. Using that, he got over 1 million signatures. It qualified for the ballot, and in 2004, it was placed there, and many of you probably voted for it. I don't know if you remember this or not. It was a very novel concept in its day, and it ended up needing 50% plus one to pass. It got 59%, which was big. So it created the agency, and it set in motion this whole process of funding research. We're now in our 21st year, and so a lot of stuff has happened. So let's go through a little bit of what CIRM is all about. Okay, so the original proposition authorized $3 billion in bonds. So you're probably wondering, little math problem up there. Where's that? What's this 3.8 all about? Well, turns out that in 2020, the $3 billion was totally deployed. So either CIRM was going to fade out at that point, or it was going to come back, which it did in the November 20 state election that year. It was Prop 14 at that point. A number of you probably voted for it, if not most here in the room. It authorized an additional $5.5 billion to give a total of $8.5 billion. So it's $8.5 billion of funding just for stem cell, and 2020 they added gene therapy as well. So it's $8.5 billion for stem cell and gene therapy research. There is nothing like this anywhere else in the country or the world. Okay, here we go. So we spent $3.8 billion. We've got about another 3.8 plus to go. Some of it goes to administrative costs. That's the math there. So what's happened in this time? So we've had in this period, we've funded research now at all these different wonderful institutions with powerhouse scientists like you have at UC Irvine. We funded 85 plus diseases and conditions, research in all of those. We have as Dr. Stamos mentioned, these, and Eileen mentioned also, the 9 alpha clinics, which I'll get into in a bit more detail. We have over 4,300 students who've been in our various programs, ranging from high school students all the way up to postdocs and beyond. 4,300 students building the workforce of tomorrow. We've had, easier to look up there than it is down at the screen with the glare, sorry about that. We've had 50 plus businesses spin out of academic institutions that now are developing these therapies and cures using stem cell and gene therapy concepts. And we've created 56,000 plus full-time equivalent jobs in the industry, the ecosystem of cell and gene therapy. Okay, very importantly, put this over here. There we go, much better. Very importantly, we design our programs to be for all Californians throughout the state. And we want to make a point of promoting representation in all of our programs that is representative of the demographics of the state. By the way, I believe that's a Irvine picture. I don't know if any of you in the picture are here tonight. Are excellent. There you go. These are our real heroes out here doing all the hard work in the trenches. Congratulations to all of you. In having representation across all our programs, we make sure that clinical trial recruitments represent all demographics. Because if you're trying to develop a therapy for something, it doesn't make any sense just to have one particular group involved in the clinical trials. So require that it covers the full demographic spectrum of those that are susceptible to whatever disease you're doing the research on. In the education and workforce, our students come from all sorts of communities across the state. We've got this very interesting thing, which I don't know if you've ever heard this sort of a bizarre term called induced pluripotent stem cells. And this is a fascinating thing. So you've heard of embryonic stem cells. Embryonic stem cells become everything in the body. About 10 years into the field, we had a Japanese scientist came up with a really unusual idea. And how he even thought to ask the question, I don't know, let alone pull it off. So the question was, if you have skin cells or blood cells, can you somehow take those skin or blood cells and reverse engineer them back to embryonic stage, which is called a pluripotent stage, become anything in the body? And he tested and tested and tested, and ultimately came up with a combination of 4 proteins, which are things in the body that drive what happens in the body. And these 4 proteins reverse engineered a skin cell back into embryonic stage, or pluripotent. That became an induced pluripotent stem cell. So you may wonder why, well, that's academically kind of cool. What's the big deal with that? And by the way, this scientist, his name was Shinya Yamanaka, who was at the University of Kyoto and splits time with the Gladstone Institute in San Francisco, which a number of you are familiar with. He got the Nobel Prize for this in about 5 years. And for those Nobel Prize historians out there, you'll know that generally it takes like 40 years, and if you're still alive, you're lucky when you get the award. And parenthetically, the day it was announced, I happened to be in our offices in San Francisco and got invited to the Gladstone Institute. And the head of the program up there, another colleague of all of your, Deepak Srivastava, hosted at that point it was Skype, no such thing as Zoom, of Dr. Yamanaka in Kyoto. Interviews him. He says, so, what was it like getting that phone call? You know, this is done through all Nobel Prizes from Sweden, all out of, he says, very understated. He said, well, I was on the floor in our kitchen repairing our dishwasher. And my wife answers the phone and says, honey, somebody from Sweden calling. And I got up, I answered the phone, they told me, and I thanked them, and I hung up the phone and went back to fixing the dishwasher. For those of you who know, Shinya is a very Shinya sort of thing to say, very humble guy. Anyway, so let's see, but I digress. So we have at CIRM a repository of the induced pluripotent stem cells. And the point of this is they're from people with a bunch of different diseases and they are representing all demographics. Now, what do you do with these things? So what you do with them is they are very useful, particularly for neurological research. Daniela could talk about this all night. So one of the problems with trying to find drugs for Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, whatever it is, you can't just give people drugs who have those conditions and keep giving them more and more and try to figure out if something works or not. So, because the FDA would never let you do that. So, what do? Well, let's say you've got a Parkinson's patient, take a skin cell, you reverse engineer it, and you have this induced pluripotent stem cell. Then you take that in a dish and you expose it to some other proteins that turn that induced pluripotent stem cell into a neuron. And then you multiply those neurons, and all of a sudden you have a dish of neurons that are from the person with Alzheimer's. You have that person's Alzheimer's dish. Then you can take any number of drugs and go what they do call high throughput screening to see if anything has an impact on the development of addition of neurons in the dish. And if it does, then you can start using that as the basis for ultimately clinical trials with whatever drug that might be against the Parkinson had in the dish, courtesy of technology. What it really did is it revolutionized particularly neurological research and is very common practice today. Anyway, we have 2,100 people cell lines in the repository and covers all the demographics. Last but not least, we have community outreach efforts that we have to make sure that the public knows about this, that patients know about the clinical trials that are here at UC Irvine and various other places. Okay, very briefly, just to give you an overview of the type of research that we fund. So you can see it here, it's split up between the propositions and different, what we call pillars. So there's basic research, we call discovery, which you're trying to identify they call a therapeutic candidate that will ultimately be something that's used to research further down the spectrum of the trial process. We have translational, which is once you have that therapeutic candidate, how do you get that from identifying it to clinical trials? And we've got the clinical trials themselves. We have the aforementioned education programs. Then we have this sort of catch-all thing called infrastructure, either buildings. So Rose Center built with certain funding, I think it was. Okay, so the main building here was built, that's infrastructure, built with CIRM funds. We have the alpha clinics are considered infrastructure, these manufacturing facilities, Lean mentioned infrastructure. And you can see that we've put a lot of money out over the years. This is a bit 6 months or so outdated, but you get the general idea. And the object is to make sure all 5 of these pillars are funded going forward. One of the things that was specified in Prop 14 is that $1.5 billion of the 5.5 has to go into neurological disease. As of 6 months ago, we'd funded 175 million of the $1.5 billion, had more since. Okay, so you may say, well, what diseases do you guys fund research in? And this pie chart shows you. Don't need to go into great detail, but you can see that it covers all sorts of things. There are, notice that we have a lot of what we would call prevalent diseases represented up there. There are also in that 34% many rare diseases as well. So we fund research literally from the ultra rare to the most prevalent. And it's one of the things that's cool about stem cells and gene therapy is that basically you can use it, figure out a way to treat virtually anything, which is in the works now. We certainly have a long way to go, but there is work being done across every kind of disease you can possibly. Okay, this is just another way of breaking down our clinical trials. You have 113 that we funded, a lot. I heard from Eileen earlier that, what's the number here right now? Yeah. Yes. Okay, so 58. That's very impressive. And you can see how that breaks down in terms of what the trials are in, again, and the different types of. As I said, we had the $1.5 billion mandated for neuro. We created a new acronym. Science field is all about acronyms. And so if you want to be really impressive at cocktail parties, you can sort of bone up on a few and trot them out there and feel quite confident nobody knows what you're talking about, but really thinks you're on top of whatever the topic is. So we created this new program called Remind, which is, as you can see, research using multidisciplinary innovative approaches in neuro diseases. The way you do acronyms is you sort of one thing and then you like pick letters. Doesn't matter if they're the beginning of words, middle of words. So, this is ultimately going to be $1.5 billion worth. I should note that in original proposition, in the original $3 billion, the percentage of grants that went towards neurological disorders was roughly the same as the percentage you have when you divide 1.5 by the 5.5 total. So we've been very attuned to neurological disorders. The first of the awards under this new Remind structure went to neuropsychiatric disease and put out $110 million. And then we had another 67.5 supporting further programs that we just had last August. So we've got a good start on the neuro frontier and a lot more work to be done. Some of the most difficult conditions that you have out there to crack from a research. Okay, here we go. There's another fellow there. We have said over 4,300 people have gone through various training. Eileen, do you have a Spark program here? Compass. Okay, so we have a, and of course, acronyms for everything. So Compass, I don't even know what it stands for. Undergraduate program with a mentoring element to it that is we actually one of the most recent education programs that we started, and it's Irvine has one, and it's a great way to get undergraduates into the field and hook them up with mentors who can really get them even more interested than they might be going into it. Compass on the right. I don't know which Compass program that is. It doesn't say Irvine. Okay. But you can see these two programs. One's high school, and then the other is the undergrad. The high school one is, they're all, I love these education programs. The high school one is remarkable because you get these kids who are in AP bio classes in their high schools, maybe have like, 30 minutes of the entire semester on stem cells. So they don't really know much about it. Kind of get a teaser, and they go into these high school programs, 6 to 8 weeks, immersion in the subject. And at the end of it, there is a meeting statewide of all the programs, and these kids give lectures on what they learned. And it's unbelievable what these kids sound like. They're like little Ph.D. students having had 8 weeks maybe in the field. Love that. But the same sort of result comes from the Compass programs. Let's see. We have here our master's programs that are in community colleges and the Cal States. And then we have the postdoc, pre-doc, and the clinical fellow called CIRM scholars. So what this is doing is the state is like absolute winner in terms of who owns cell and gene therapy nationally. No state that's anywhere remotely close. And in order to be able to have the industry that's created out of this field, you've got to have the workforce. So all of these things are super important. Very, very proud of everybody who goes through them. Okay, there's reference to the alpha clinics, which are the clinical trial units that Eileen referenced. We have 9 of them. You can see the institutions up there. And the point of having a network is to have them collaborate on best practices, common IRBs, which are approval processes to get things into clinical trials. They share a lot of their experience so that they all benefit from what they are doing at each of the clinical trial centers. Again, this is the only one of these things we know of in the country, such a network, and it's worked famously. And so we're very, very proud of that. Had over 250 trials at the 9 sites. Importantly, not just what we fund, but others fund other projects. They are eligible as well. And both ours and others comprise the 250. And so it's a wonderful network that if you're somebody who really needs a clinical trial, these institutions are so informed on everything that needs to be done that it is the place to go. And we strongly encourage patients throughout the state, if they can, to go. Okay, so now we get to this manufacturing concept. Now, there's mentioning of this is a weird thing. How do you manufacture cells? I know how you manufacture a t-shirt, but what's this whole thing about manufacturing cells? Well, in order to have cells that you're going to use for treatments in whatever it is that you're doing research on, you have to make a lot of them, right? So there's a very complicated process using bioreactors and chemicals and all sorts of other things, and you end up at the end of the day with very large supplies of these cells that are used for treatment. So that's called cell manufacturing. So fairly recently, we set up another network of, see here, again, UCI prominently featured, of 9 institutions across the state. They're all based at academic or clinician-based institutions that manufacture cells. And these just had a meeting last week of all the heads of the cell manufacturing facilities got together up in Northern California to talk about sharing best practices, et cetera. And so, again, only in California, sort of thing. Okay, then there are, when patients who want to be in clinical trials, there are expenses involved. Travel, there's lodging, there's lost wages, there's all sorts of stuff. And some, very commonly, patients cannot afford collateral expenses of one. So we have what we call a patient support program, within which is a patient assistance fund that has $15.6 million that's managed by an outside consultant, and people who are involved in clinical trials can apply for this patient support that allows them to be involved in the clinical trial process itself. Okay. Now, another thing that was mandated by Prop 14 was, so you think about it, you saw the alpha clinics, they're in all these academic centers. Well, there are a bunch of areas in the state that don't have an alpha clinic, and they're a long way away from an alpha clinic. So if you want to get involved in a clinical trial, wouldn't it be nice if there was sort of a network of satellite little alpha clinics out there that can treat and deliver therapies and treatments to patients as part of grander alpha clinic network system? So we came up with this idea called Community Care Centers of Excellence, and that, which is something that's going to launch this year. It's a new program. And it's basically going to set up these satellites and allow people all over the state to have something that's closer to them that they can actually access, take advantage of the clinical trial network. Okay, I think this is my last slide. So last year, we at CIRM began to get a unusually high volume of grant applications, like 3 to 4 times normal. And it occurred to us that while we still have 3.8 billion or so, which is a huge number to put out, it's not infinite. So we decided that for the first time ever, CIRM was going to take a close look at prioritizing where to spend that last 3.8 so as to give the maximum benefit to Californians with conditions ranging from rare disease to the most prevalent. We undertook a very lengthy data-driven process to develop something we called the Strategic Allocation Framework, or SAF. And as part of that, the board of CIRM, which I guess I can mention, Eileen, I was chair of for 12 years before becoming CEO, but kind of been around a while now. The board adopted 6 goals about what we want to do with our money going forward. See these 6 goals up there. This first one is dealing in basic research, talking about identifying novel targets. And a target in stem cell and gene therapy parlance is like a mutation. It's something you're trying to correct. So you wanted to develop 4 novel targets and biomarkers, things that identify that there's a condition there or a target you can go after, so that we can further advance on a basic discovery approach, the different types of diseases that we can take into preclinical and clinical testing. The second one was to accelerate development, utilization of 5 to 8 technologies. These are different ways that you manipulate cells and to get to stem cell therapies or gene therapies or whatever. There are lots of new ideas that come along. Pluripotent stem cell was a new technology developed in 2007 as an example. Number 3, to advance at least 4 to 7 rare disease projects to BLA. BLA is another acronym for, this is a license that you get from the FDA at the end of all your clinical trials to allow you to commercialize your product. Then we wanted to get 15 to 20 therapies targeting diseases affecting Californians all the way to the end of the whole clinical trial process, which is a lot about clinical trials. Then next, to ensure that this is very important, every BLA, commercializable, ready program has a strategy for access and affordability. Now, you may have heard that these therapies are really expensive. And we want to make sure that every Californian has access to these things and that they're affordable, which are really difficult questions. First of all, the access gets to how do you get people from all over the state to where they can get to a facility where they can receive treatment. And by the way, this is out in the future. Very little in the stem cell space to date has actually gotten all the way through clinical trials to market, but it's coming. We need to figure out when it comes, how are people going to be able to use it? We can help, CIRM can help that because it can require access plans from all of the applicants for CIRM grants. So that we can have a hand in. The affordability one is a really tricky one because it relies on insurance companies agreeing to cover the cost of these expensive treatments. And we're not in a position to really affect that because it's really the companies creating the product that are dealing with the insurers, not we, the funders of research that created the products, companies. So that's going to be something that is going to need to be worked out, because until these products that are developed inevitably become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, the insurance companies more and more convincing that they should pay the expensive one-time treatment instead of paying the chronic treatment over the rest of your life. Get something on a one-time basis. And doesn't that make more sense? Because when you sort of present value back all the money the insurance companies pay for chronic treatments over the rest of your life, and compare that to the one-time, albeit expensive treatment today, makes more sense to do the one time, not to mention the fact these things will be cures. That's huge, right? That's what cell and gene therapy is all about, cures. And the last thing is to continue to develop our workforce, which are absolutely. Each of these goals has about umpteen recommendations per goal. They led to development of a bunch of new concept plans to implement the goals, which we're now in the process of developing this year and rolling out through board approval over the course of the coming few months. So we'll be all the way through this with a whole new set of programs all ready to go for application. Continue using our $3.8 billion to maximum. So that's CIRM in a nutshell. And Eileen, thank you for the opportunity to explain that to everybody. And I should say, thank you, because this is being funded 100% by the public. The bonds are issued by the state. The debt service on the bonds is issued by monies from the general fund at the state, funded by all various taxes, everything else, everybody into that pot. So we all are funding it. Thank you.
So we have an incredible brain trust. And so the next part of what we can do tonight is have a session really explore that are raised here. I want to just highlight something else about CIRM funding that I often say at our monthly lectures. But I think it isn't always obvious to folks that are thinking about where funding for science that happens in academic institutions. Heard here from Dr. Thomas that, of course, CIRM has been an incredible player in space in California. For us, writ large, the National Institute of Health is very, very important. That's in right now. But I think what people don't always realize is academic research, what happens in wet labs where bench work is done at the discovery stage at institutions like University of California, not just at Irvine, but across all of the different campuses across the campus. That is the engine that drives this process. Without funding from those sources into academic research facilities, the process breaks. It's our secret how things work. And the only way that funding comes in is through federal funding, National Institutes of Health, state funding from this incredibly unique organization that we have in California, CIRM, and philanthropy. That is the only. So I tell students when I give lectures like this, those pharmaceutical commercials that you see on TV drive me, where it's all about the discovery here and they're wearing their white lab coats and the implication that all of that work was done at that company. That is the absolute end stage of the game after all of this investment has been done. And I think it's really critical to try and help people understand that process, especially in that we're in. So that's my editorializing. I'd like to